We know that restrictions on trans rights often go hand in hand with attacks on abortion access. And there's a key line in Donald Trump's sweeping executive order around gender identity that is not only bad news for trans people, but could also signal even more attacks on reproductive rights to come. This week, the freshly sworn-in president signed dozens of executive orders, including a particularly nasty one, taking aim at trans Americans, titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. And yeah, based on that title alone, there's a lot to unpack there. The order calls on the federal government to only recognize two genders, restricts trans people's ability to have gender markers that match their identity, and forces incarcerated trans women into men's prisons. It's a lot of bad news, but also folded into the language around gender markers on ID and biological reality is this line, where the Trump administration seeks to define the difference between female and male. The order claims that, quote, female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell, while male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. And the key words there are person at conception. The order is obviously the Trump administration's attempts to jump through scientific and medical hoops to codify gender, a historically difficult thing to codify because bodies and people are so varied. At the state level, we've seen attempts to define woman focus on assigned sex at birth or chromosomes or on having a uterus. But one big problem with all of those definitions beyond the existence of trans and intersex people is that even cis people have variety within those characteristics. So in drafting this order, the Trump administration decided to go right to the beginning of life and everything. But the choice to go with person at conception here also reads as a pretty clear signal that reproductive rights are still top of mind for Trump's next era. Because if they're making the claim here that gender or sex starts at conception, then in their eyes, so could life and personhood. And that's an idea that itself has become heavily politicized and legislated as part of reproductive access laws over the past few decades. We know that Republicans are obsessed with policing bodily autonomy. And long before they were obsessed with trans kids playing sports, they were obsessed with women and other people who can give birth. We've seen that in the long-running campaign to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was successful in 2022 thanks largely to a Supreme Court packed with Trump's justice picks. And while Trump's been out of office, attempts to restrict reproductive rights at the state level have just continued to chug along. And so many of these laws are rooted in debates about when life begins. Project 2025, the sweeping far-right policy framework for Trump's presidency from the conservative think tank the Heritage Foundation, lays out clear proposals to further restrict abortion access across America, including eliminating access to medical abortion drugs and restricting the use of federal funds for abortion care and coverage. And as we know, Trump's already done that with an executive order about trans healthcare. If this small hint from Trump's anti-trans executive order means anything, we must be vigilant for attacks on reproductive freedom to come. Buckle